The flame danced between Thyra's fingers as she gazed at Kára's face across the sacred fire. Their eyes met in a fleeting moment before the priestess looked away. How could she, a revered vulva of the Sköldung, feel such devotion for a Mercian prisoner? The fire ritual beginning would seal not only her village's fate, but theirs forever. Thank you for joining this journey into a world of ancient rites and forbidden feelings. This channel is just beginning, and every subscription means the chance to keep telling these stories alive. If you find yourself moved by this tale, please subscribe and share where you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference as we strive to reach our first 1,000 followers. The pale light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy of ancient pines that bordered the Sköldung village, casting long shadows over the damp earth. A crisp chill lingered in the air, the sharp breath of early autumn settling in before the first snows of winter. Mist curled like ghostly fingers between the trunks, rising slowly from the moss-carpeted ground, veiling the forest's secrets in a soft silver haze. The village lay just beyond the edge of this whispering wildwood, a cluster of rough-hewn wooden longhouses clustered against the encroaching wilderness, their roofs heavy with layers of sod and thatch, darkened by years of smoke and rain. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, winding upward to mingle with the gray sky. Thyra Freyrdottir moved silently along the narrow path where forest met clearing. The weight of the morning pressed around her, the earthy scent of damp wood, the faint tang of pine resin, and the subtle, sharp aroma of crushed herbs beneath her boots. She was alone, save for the occasional distant call of a raven or the rustle of leaves as a squirrel darted through the branches. This solitude was hers alone, a sacred space before the storm of the day to come. Her hands, slender but steady, brushed over the undergrowth, gathering the pale green leaves of the meadowsweet, the delicate white blossoms of yarrow, and the dark, glossy sprigs of boxwood. Each leaf and root she selected carried meaning, power, and promise. The soft rustle of fabric accompanied her movements, linen dyed deep blue, worn but carefully mended, hugging her lithe frame beneath the leather belt that cinched her tunic at the waist. Her long hair, the color of smoldering embers, was braided with strips of leather and interwoven with sprigs of wild thyme and heather. Occasionally, a stray lock escaped to frame her pale, freckled face. Her green eyes, deep and ancient like the forest itself, scanned the horizon with a quiet intensity, attentive to every shift in light and shadow. At 32 winters, she was young for a vulva, a title reserved for the wisest and most revered priestesses of the Sköldung clan. Yet from the tender years when she barely survived the fever that had torn through her family, the gods had marked her. Her people whispered of the fire that danced in her spirit, the visions that came to her in dreams, and the way she could call upon the unseen forces that whispered through the trees and stones. This day, in particular, weighed heavily on her heart. It was the eve of the festival of the Fire Purifier, a ritual held only once every 3 years, when offerings were made to the gods to ease the harsh winters and protect the village from famine and strife. As she knelt on the forest floor, Thyra's fingers brushed the rough stems of valerian roots, their scent earthy and calming. She gathered them carefully, mindful not to damage the fragile fibrous strands beneath the soil. She added yarrow to the mix, its bright white flowers a symbol of healing and protection. Her breath was steady, her mind a steady current of prayers and incantations, weaving old words with new hope. The chant of the ancestors hummed at the edges of her consciousness, a thread connecting past and present. Her thoughts flickered to the village, where preparations were already underway. The men had begun to clear the central clearing for the great pyre, 9 smaller fires encircling a towering central flame, each representing a sacred element of the world. The air was thick with tension since the recent skirmish with the Saxons of Mercia. The clash had left scars not only on the land, but on the spirits of the Sköldung. Houses had burned, fields were trampled. The captives taken would pay the price, as was custom. And yet a heavy unease sat upon Thyra's chest, a whisper of doubt that no ritual or chant could easily banish. A sudden rustle drew her gaze upward, a falcon wheeling against the slate sky, its cry sharp and piercing. The bird seemed a messenger, a fleeting symbol of freedom and wildness beyond the village walls. But Thyra was bound, as much by duty as by blood, to the life she had known since childhood. Her brother Halfdan, the Jarl, had taken the mantle of leadership with iron resolve, his gaze as unforgiving as the northern wind. His decisions shaped the fate of their people, and today his will would decide the fate of the prisoners. Thyra pushed herself up from the mossy earth, her knees brushing against the dampness. She fingered the silver amulet of Freya resting against her chest, the goddess whom she revered most, protector of love, war, and the hidden strength of women. The pendant was cool to the touch, worn smooth by years of prayer and ritual. She closed her eyes for a moment, seeking the quiet voice of the divine in the restless forest. The chill of the coming winter was no longer just a season. It was a shadow looming over every choice she would soon make. The distant sound of footsteps approached, steady, heavy, and purposeful. Ulf Thorson emerged from the tree line, his broad frame silhouetted against the rising sun. The warrior's face bore the lines of many winters, his dark brown eyes calm yet alert. His beard, streaked with gray, was braided in the style of their clan. At his side hung a sword, well worn, its hilt carved with knotwork. He paused beside Thyra, nodding in silent greeting. "The village wakes early this morning," Ulf said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Halfdan has summoned the shield-bearers. The captives are being brought to the square." Thyra's heart tightened. Though the time had come, the thought of the prisoners, especially the women, filled her with dread. She turned toward the soft glow of firelight flickering beyond the trees, where the longhouses stood thick and silent but for the murmurs of the clan. "Have the preparations for the ritual been completed?" she asked. "Aye," Ulf replied. "The pyres are ready, the offerings laid out. But there's talk among the men. Some question the justice of the sacrifices. Halfdan's word will be final, though." Thyra studied the horizon, where the sky burned pink and orange with the rising sun. The unsettled air seemed to press upon her, heavy with fate. "It is not for us to question the gods," she whispered. Ulf's gaze lingered on her face. "And yet you do." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "I seek only to understand their will." The two stood in silence a moment longer, before Thyra continued her walk toward the village. Her thoughts drifted to the prisoners taken in the recent raid. Among them, one figure haunted her mind, a woman whose presence stirred a forbidden something deep within her. Earlier that day, as the captives were dragged into the village, Thyra had watched from the shadows. The men bore their burdens with grim resignation, heads bowed or eyes closed against the icy wind. The women, however, were different. Among them was one who stood apart, not in stature, but in spirit. Her golden hair caught the weak sunlight, messy but shining like ripe wheat. Her eyes, a piercing blue, met Thyra's briefly, steady and unafraid, despite the bruises marking her cheek and hands. That woman was Kára. When Thyra inquired about her, Ulf had said she was once of noble Saxon blood, caught trying to escape with a child. The small silver brooch pinned to her cloak bore the intricate mark of a Mercian house. Thyra's lips pressed into a thin line. This woman carried more than just fear or pain. There was history, pride, and secrets hidden beneath that calm gaze.
As she entered her dwelling, a modest cabin on the edge of the village, walls lined with bundles of dried herbs and pressed flowers, Thyra set down her gathered plants carefully on the wooden table. The scent of mugwort and juniper filled the small space, mingling with the lingering smoke from the hearth. She pulled a small leather pouch from her belt, removing several slender sticks of incense made from pine resin and dried rose petals. Lighting one, she moved with deliberate grace, letting the smoke curl upward in spirals.
Her reflection caught in the polished surface of a bronze mirror, her face framed by the flame-lit shadows, pale and marked with faint runic tattoos along her forearms and hands. A fine scar traced a line over her left eyebrow, a keepsake from a childhood accident. The juxtaposition of delicate features and hardened resolve created a mask she wore for her people. But beneath that mask, questions festered. The coming festival would demand sacrifice, blood spilled to appease gods who seemed distant and inscrutable. The men captured in battle would be offered to the fire, their deaths ensuring the survival of the clan. The women, including Kára, were to be given as servants or slaves, their fates sealed by the traditions that had long governed their world. Yet Thyra's heart rebelled against this cold certainty. Her fingers brushed the amulet of Freya once more, the goddess who embraced love's complexity and the fierce loyalty of women. Could the gods truly desire such cruelty? Was there no room for mercy in their ancient decrees? Her thoughts returned to the woman from Myrsa. Thyra felt a strange pull, a powerful connection that defied reason or duty. The healer's knowledge of herbs and remedies was known even among the Saxons. Perhaps there was a different path, a way to honor the gods without bloodshed, to weave new bonds in the fabric of endless conflict. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as night fell, and the village was bathed in a silver glow cast by the moon. Thyra sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, the fragrant smoke of the incense thickening around her. She whispered runic prayers for guidance, her voice barely audible, trembling with the weight of the choices before her. The festival awaited, and with it the turning of fate's cruel wheel. Outside, the wind gathered, carrying with it the distant echoes of drums and voices, preparing the village for the sacred rite. Thyra closed her eyes, imagining the dance of flames, the solemn faces of her kin, and the eyes of the stranger, Kára, who had already begun to change everything. In the stillness of this night, two worlds hovered on the edge of collision, one bound by tradition and fire, the other by hope and the fragile promise of understanding. And in the silence between heartbeats, Thyra's resolve began to take shape. The first light of morning had barely touched the edges of the village when the sharp, desperate cries rose from the stable. Thyra was still gathering her thoughts, the weight of the coming day pressing heavily upon her chest, when the harsh sound tore through the calm. She quickened her pace, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as she moved toward the source. The stable was a crude structure, walls fashioned of rough-hewn logs and a roof that sagged under the burden of moss and time. Its air was thick with the pungent scent of sweat, stale hay, and fear. Inside, the low flicker of a lantern cast long shadows over the dirt floor, where several prisoners were confined. Men and women alike, their faces pale and gaunt, their bodies marked by bruises and exhaustion. Thyra's gaze swept over the captives, but it was the figure on the far side that seized her attention. A woman struggling violently against the coarse ropes binding her wrists. The golden strands of her hair, tangled and matted with grime, caught the lantern's light and seemed almost to blaze in contrast to the dimness around her. Her eyes, an icy blue that held equal measures of defiance and exhaustion, locked briefly with Thyra's. This was Kára. Thyra's breath hitched.
The woman's chest heaved with ragged breaths, her muscles trembling with hunger and fear. But it was the fire burning behind those eyes that caught the priestess's heart in an unexpected grip. She stepped forward, her voice steady yet soft. "Peace, Kára. You are under my protection." Kára's gaze flickered, suspicion mingling with a flicker of relief. She tried to speak, but her voice was cracked and raw. "They will kill us, the men first," she gasped, "and then us if we do not obey." Thyra's hands clenched at her sides. The ritual was only hours away, a night when the village would gather around the great fires to offer their sacrifices to the gods. The men prisoners were doomed, and the women's futures were no less bleak. Thyra could feel the cold grip of tradition tightening like a noose around her throat. Still, the sight of Kára, so fierce, so broken, stirred something inside her that defied logic. How could she stand by and allow this to happen when the woman before her embodied resilience and strength so unlike the helpless victims she had imagined? Her mind raced, torn between duty and a growing, forbidden compassion. "Why do you fight so hard?" Thyra whispered, kneeling beside her. "You know the customs. You know what awaits us all." Kára's glare burned with unshed tears as she spat out words that echoed like a curse. "I fight because I cannot let my people suffer more. I fight because the gods you serve demand cruelty, but I believe they are not just. And I fight because if I fall, who will protect the child I risked everything to save?" Thyra's heart faltered at the mention of the child. The memory of the small face she had glimpsed briefly during the raid, the child hidden and spared, pressed upon her conscience. She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Kára's bruised cheek. Her touch was gentle but firm, a silent promise. "I will protect you both." A rumble of footsteps interrupted the fragile moment. Ragnvald's harsh voice echoed outside, his presence like a storm about to break. "Bring her out," he barked. "The vulva hides her too well. She must face the fire like the rest." Thyra rose quickly, her gaze hardening. She met Ragnvald's glare with a calm defiance he could neither break nor ignore.
"Kára remains under my guard until the ritual concludes," she declared. "Anyone who challenges this will answer to me." Ragnvald sneered, but the weight of her title and the piercing stares of the gathered villagers forced him to back down, for now. As he retreated, Thyra's mind was a tempest. The choice before her was clear, yet terrifying. Comply with the customs that demanded death and submission, or defy centuries of tradition and risk everything for the woman and child she barely knew but could no longer ignore. The fire in her chest burned fiercely, not just for the gods, but for the fragile hope kindling between two souls caught in the tangled web of war and faith. In the quiet that followed, Thyra gathered her herbs and healing salves, preparing to tend to Kára's wounds, despite the murmurs of disapproval that would surely follow. She set about binding torn flesh and cleaning bruises, her hands steady, though her heart trembled beneath the weight of what was to come. Kára watched silently, the fierce light in her eyes flickering with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. The two women, separated by blood and battle, now shared a fragile bond forged in the shadow of death. As the sun rose higher, casting pale gold over the village, Thyra made a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would stand between Kára and the flames. The gods might demand sacrifice, but she would find another way, a path through darkness toward a new dawn. The day stretched onward, heavy with anticipation. The village buzzed with preparations, men sharpening blades, women weaving garlands of herbs to hang in doorways, children watching with wide eyes from the edges of the gathering crowds. The festival of the Fire Purifier was not just a ritual, it was the heartbeat of their world, the thread that bound them to their ancestors and gods. Yet in Thyra's mind, the ancient songs felt hollow, the flames ready to consume more than just offerings to the gods. Her thoughts returned again and again to Kára's steady gaze, to the whispered promise she had made. The weight of her responsibility settled like a stone in her stomach. She was a priestess, a seer of fate and guardian of tradition, but now her path diverged sharply from the one laid out by her forebears. Her fingers brushed the amulet of Freya at her throat, seeking strength from the goddess's embrace. Freya, who understood the fierce complexity of women's hearts, who walked between worlds of love and war with a grace none could match. Thyra prayed silently, for guidance, for courage, for the wisdom to see beyond the fire and the blood. As the afternoon sun dipped low, Thyra found herself drawn once more to the edge of the village, where Kára sat quietly by the fire heap. The woman's gaze was distant, but when their eyes met, a silent conversation passed between them, of fear, of defiance, of fragile hope. Without words, Thyra reached out and took Kára's hand in hers. The touch was electric, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty.
"I will not abandon you," Thyra promised, her voice barely more than a breath. "Not now, not ever." Kára's grip tightened, a faint smile flickering at the corner of her lips. For a moment, the two were not priestess and prisoner, Viking and Saxon, enemy and captive. They were simply two women bound by a shared desire to survive, to live, to find light in a world shadowed by fire. The dusk deepened, and with it the tension in the village swelled. The drums of war and ritual began to beat steadily, their rhythm echoing through the wooden halls and open fields. Thyra knew that once the fires were lit, nothing would ever be the same. But in that fleeting twilight, beneath the gathering stars and the scent of burning pine, she made her choice. No matter the cost, she would protect the vulnerable. She would choose compassion in a world built on sacrifice. And in that choice she found the first flicker of a revolution, a fire that no blade could extinguish. The night had deepened, folding the village under a thick blanket of darkness, pierced only by the flicker of distant torches and the occasional creak of timber settling into the cold. The firelight from the great ceremonial pyres had long since died to embers, leaving the earth chilled and the air heavy with smoke and lingering tension. Thyra moved swiftly yet silently through the shadows, her wolfskin cloak drawn tightly around her shoulders, the amulet of Freya resting cold and steady against her chest. Her footsteps led her to the small cabin at the edge of the village, the one she had claimed as her sanctuary, away from the prying eyes and whispers of the Skjoldung. The low structure was humble, constructed from weathered logs and insulated with layers of moss and rushes. Inside, bundles of dried herbs hung from rafters, their distinct scents weaving together in a tapestry of healing power. The hearth was cold now, the ashes pale and ashen, but Thyra would soon rekindle its warmth. At the threshold she paused, gathering her resolve. Behind her, the sounds of the village faded into a distant murmur. Ahead, the fragile figure of Kára waited, weary and guarded, bound by invisible chains heavier than any rope. The weight of what had transpired earlier, the confrontation with Ragnvald, the defiance of tradition, settled on Thyra's shoulders like the stones of the longhouse walls. "Kára," Thyra whispered, voice barely more than a breath carried on the cold wind. "Come inside. You are safe here." The blue eyes that met hers held a flicker of surprise, perhaps disbelief. For a moment, Kára hesitated, as if the notion of sanctuary was strange, foreign. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she stepped into the cabin, her movements wary but steady. Thyra closed the door behind her, the latch clicking softly, sealing the world outside. The cabin felt smaller now, more intimate. The faint scent of pine and smoke mingled with the sharp tang of dried herbs.
A thin thread of moonlight slanted through the small window, tracing silver patterns on rough-hewn wooden walls. Thyra moved to the hearth, striking flint against steel with practiced ease. Sparks caught dry tinder, and soon a slender flame flickered to life, casting wavering shadows that danced like spirits across the room. Kára's gaze followed the fire, her face illuminated in soft amber light. There was a tension in her posture, the tight grip of muscles trained to endure pain and suspicion. Thyra approached slowly, mindful of the fragile trust beginning to form between them. "I will tend to your wounds," Thyra said gently, reaching for a small leather pouch hanging from her belt. "The marks you carry are more than skin deep, but the herbs may ease the ache." Kára's lips parted, as if to protest or refuse, then closed again. Her blue eyes searched Thyra's face, looking for any sign of deceit or cruelty. Finding none, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Thyra set to work with care. She dipped strips of clean linen into a bowl of water infused with willow bark and yarrow, their bitter scent filling the cabin. Her fingers, delicate yet skilled, cleaned the bruises darkening Kára's pale skin, the grimace that escaped the prisoner's lips revealing the sharp sting of fresh wounds. Thyra's touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if each motion was a prayer woven in the language of healing. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. The crackle of the fire and the soft rustle of fabric were the only sounds accompanying their cautious proximity. Thyra noticed the fine lines around Kára's eyes, the fatigue etched by nights without rest, by burdens carried alone. The small half-moon-shaped birthmark at the base of her neck peeked from beneath tangled hair, a detail so personal it spoke of stories untold. As she worked, Thyra's thoughts wandered to the silver brooch hidden beneath Kára's cloak, a symbol of nobility perhaps, but also of a life violently disrupted. She wondered about the child Kára had risked everything to protect, the little one hidden beyond reach. The weight of that secret pressed silently between them. When the wounds were cleaned and wrapped, Thyra produced a small pot of thick, fragrant salve made from pine resin and beeswax, blending it with crushed comfrey and calendula. She applied it carefully to the worst bruises and a shallow cut along Kára's forearm. The prisoner flinched but remained still, allowing the care despite the lingering fear. Thyra then produced a simple bowl of warm broth, water steeped with meadowsweet, a touch of salt, and finely chopped roots for strength. She placed it before Kára and stepped back, watching as the woman hesitated before taking the offering in her hands. The broth was lukewarm, but to Kára must have felt like a rare comfort, a small kindness in a world turned hostile. For a long moment their eyes met again. Two souls from opposing worlds, connected by something fragile and fierce.
Thyra saw the flicker of something unspoken in Kára's gaze, questions, fears, perhaps the faintest glimmer of trust. It was enough. Thyra moved to a rough-hewn bench, sitting down and pulling Kára gently to rest against her. The warmth of the fire seeped into their bones, but it was the closeness, the silences shared, that began to thaw the frost between them. "I have known loss," Thyra said softly, her voice trembling with honesty. "The fever took my kin, my mother, my sister. It left me with this burden, to carry their memories, their hopes." Kára's expression softened, just slightly, as if the words reached a hidden place within her.
"They say the gods choose those who will bear pain," Thyra continued, "but sometimes I wonder if it is not the gods, but fate itself, cold and unyielding, that binds us." Kára's hand brushed timidly against Thyra's, fingers tracing the runic tattoos along the priestess's forearm. The marks were ancient, symbols of protection and prophecy, but here they felt personal, a language written in skin. "I do not understand your gods," Kára said quietly, "but I know the pain of loss, of war, of hunger. We are not so different, you and I." The words floated between them, fragile as the smoke rising from the dying fire. Thyra nodded, feeling the unspoken truth settle deep within her chest. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant echoes of the village still bound by tradition and expectation. But here, in this small cabin, two women carved out a space beyond the clash of clans and the fire of war. Thyra reached into a woven basket and pulled out a small bundle of linen cloth. Gently, she began to braid strips of wild thyme and lavender into Kára's hair, the fragrant herbs a shield against darkness and despair. The act was intimate, a quiet rebellion against the harshness of their world. Kára closed her eyes, leaning into the touch, as if allowing herself to believe in a moment of peace. The hours slipped by in wordless communion, broken only by the occasional crack of firewood or the soft intake of breath. When the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the window, Thyra rose and folded her hands in her lap. "There will be eyes watching," she said cautiously. "Suspicion will not fade easily. But this night has shown me that mercy is not weakness." Kára looked up, her gaze steady, carrying a strength born of survival. "And love?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Is there room for that in your world?" Thyra's smile was small, but real, a fragile flame against the cold. "Perhaps," she whispered, "if we dare to kindle it." As the village stirred awake beyond the cabin walls, the two women remained together in the quiet sanctuary they had forged. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by the weight of tradition and the specter of conflict. Yet in this shared silence they found a spark of hope, an ember that might one day grow to challenge the flames of fate.
For now it was enough. The first whispers of the dawn had barely settled when the village began to stir with a tension more palpable than the chill in the morning air. The festival's embers still glowed faintly in the shadows of the longhouses, but already the Sköldung felt the weight of unease pressing on their shoulders like an approaching storm. The night's daring shift, the cessation of blood sacrifice, the sparing of prisoners, the acceptance of Kára into Thyra's sacred circle had not gone unnoticed. It was not long before the murmurs swelled beyond the village borders, carried by tongues eager for news, by feet that moved swiftly along worn paths threading through the dense pines and rocky hills. Traders returning from distant markets, hunters roaming the forests, and even neighboring clans, whose loyalty was as fickle as the northern winds, all caught wind of something unusual in the Sköldung village, something that unsettled the ancient order. Thyra, sensing the gathering storm, moved with cautious urgency. The small cabin where she and Kára had spent the night felt suddenly vulnerable, its walls too thin to keep out the mounting whispers that pressed against its door. The sacred amulet of Freya lay heavy against her chest, a talisman of hope and defiance. Yet even it could not shield her from the growing shadow cast by suspicion. Word came first from Ulf, his face grave as he approached the cabin with a hurried step. His eyes, normally calm and assessing, flickered with a warning unease.
Halfdan demands answers, he said, without preamble, his voice low but edged with tension. The men speak of the change in the ritual, how you spared the prisoners, placed the Saxon woman among your circle. Some say you've broken the sacred laws. Thyra's breath tightened. Halfdan must understand the signs. The fire spoke in a new tongue. Ulf shook his head. Halfdan listens, but others do not. Ragnvald is stirring unrest, spreading talk of treason, of weakness. The name struck like a blade. Ragnvald, the warrior whose icy gaze had haunted the village since the return of the captives, was already fanning flames of dissent. "Then I must speak to Halfdan," Thyra said, gathering her cloak, "before his judgment is made by others." Ulf nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I will go with you. The path is dangerous if others hear only what they want to." Together they stepped into the cold morning, the village stirring around them like a beast awakening. The longhouses cast long shadows, their wooden beams groaning softly beneath the weight of winter's approach. Neighbors passed with wary glances, some openly whispering, others averted their eyes as if afraid to meet the vulva's gaze. Halfdan awaited them in the long hall, his presence commanding even without the weight of the heavy bear cloak draped over his shoulders.
His face was carved with the lines of battle and leadership, his scar catching the morning light as he regarded Thyra with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant kinship. "You summoned me?" Thyra began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The festival changed. The fire spoke. I followed its voice." Halfdan's eyes narrowed. "The fire spoke of defiance, of mercy to our enemies? The men say you've weakened us, Thyra, that you've invited ruin with your actions." "I invited understanding," she replied firmly. "Kára is no mere prisoner. She carries knowledge that can heal wounds beyond the body, wounds of war and hatred." Halfdan's jaw clenched. "And what of the laws we have lived by for generations? What of the pact with the gods who guard us?" "The gods are not deaf," Thyra whispered, stepping closer. "They show us new paths when old ones lead to death and despair." The room grew heavy with silence. Halfdan's gaze shifted to Ulf, who stood stoic but tense. "There are those who will not accept this," Ulf said quietly. "Ragnvald gathers men. He speaks of rebellion." A shadow flickered across Halfdan's face, the leader's doubts momentarily betrayed by a tightening grip on his sword hilt. "Then they will have to answer to me. The Sköldung will not fracture over one woman, no matter how skilled." Thyra's eyes searched her brother's. "But if we fracture within, what hope is there against those who wait beyond our borders?" Halfdan's expression hardened. "Enemies do wait. The Saxons will not forget this day. The neighboring clans will see us as weak." "And yet," Thyra pressed, "there is strength in mercy, in building bridges rather than burning them." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the great doors. A group of men, faces grim and voices raised, pressed into the hall. Ragnvald led them, his pale hair gleaming like frost, eyes sharp and cold as the steel of his axe. "The vulva betrays us all," he spat, his voice carrying through the room like a jagged blade. "She shields the enemy, turns our sacred rites to folly. What say you, Jarl? Will you stand with your sister or your people?" The hall's tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. Some warriors shifted uneasily, others glared with open hostility. Halfdan's eyes met Ragnvald, cold and unyielding. "My sister acts as she sees fit, but I will not let her endanger the clan." Ragnvald's sneer deepened. "Then you leave the weak to be trampled by the strong. I will not serve a leader who betrays our blood and gods."
He turned sharply, signaling the men behind him. They filed out, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the silent hall. Thyra's heart pounded, the fire of defiance burning fiercely within her. She knew the path ahead was treacherous, not only from enemies without, but from the unrest growing like a wound within her own people. The fragile peace she had fought to kindle now hung by a thread, threatened by fear and old grudges.
Outside, the village whispered with rumors. Some feared the wrath of the gods for the broken sacrifices. Others whispered of witchcraft and dark pacts. Mothers pulled their children close, and warriors sharpened blades, not just for distant foes, but for shadows closer to home. Kára, ever watchful, remained silent but alert. Thyra could see the tension etched in the healer's every movement, the constant weighing of danger against the hope that had brought them together. That night, as the moon cast its silver light over the cold village, a different kind of fire burned in the hearts of the Skjoldung. Not the cleansing flames of sacrifice, but the smoldering embers of doubt, fear, and a desperate yearning for change. Thyra stood at the edge of the village, the scent of pine and smoke swirling around her. In her hands, the amulet of Freya pulsed faintly, a reminder of the goddess's silent strength. She knew the storm was coming. The world beyond their borders had noticed the shift, and the fragile threads of their fragile new order were being pulled taut. Yet, as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant howls of wolves and the murmurs of unseen watchers, Thyra breathed deeply of the cold night air. For all the danger, for all the threats looming on the horizon, she held fast to one truth. Love and mercy could ignite a fire stronger than fear, and in that fire there was hope. But hope, in a world forged by steel and blood, was a fragile, flickering thing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of uncertainty. Traders who came and went carried hushed tales of what had transpired in the Skjoldung village, rumors twisting and turning with each retelling. Some spoke of the Volva's mercy as a blessing, a sign of the gods' evolving will. Others whispered of madness, of curses soon to fall upon them all. The neighboring clans, long rivals and wary watchers, sent envoys under the guise of diplomacy, but with eyes sharp for weakness. Their greetings were laced with veiled threats, their presence a reminder that the old ways still held sway beyond the fragile peace Thyra sought to build. One afternoon, as Thyra tended the communal herb garden, a figure approached with measured steps. It was Eric, a scout from a nearby clan, known for their fierce loyalty to tradition and relentless suspicion of outsiders. His eyes, dark and assessing, fixed on Thyra as she looked up. "Volva," he began, voice rough but not unkind. "Word travels fast. The Skjoldung break old laws. You harbor the enemy within your walls." Thyra met his gaze without flinching. "I harbor truth and hope. The old laws do not bind us when they lead only to death." Eric's lips pressed into a thin line. "You risk more than your own fate. The clans watch. If your brother wavers, they will move." The weight of his words settled over her like a winter frost. The delicate balance between peace and war, mercy and cruelty, was as precarious as ever. Yet, within Thyra, the fire still burned. A fire kindled not by the flames of sacrifice, but by the fierce determination to protect the vulnerable, challenge the old, and forge a new path, even if it led through shadow. As night fell once more, the village lay quiet but restless. Beyond the protective circle of wooden walls and watchful sentries, the forest seemed alive with unseen eyes and whispered threats. Thyra returned to the cabin where Kára waited, the healer's gaze unwavering despite the storm gathering around them.
"We walk a dangerous path," Thyra said softly, pulling Kára close, "but we do not walk it alone." Kára's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with an unspoken promise. In the silence of that fragile sanctuary, two women, bound by fate and courage, faced the encroaching darkness. The fire ritual had changed their lives forever, and now the world outside was beginning to change too. The dawn broke with a brittle light, pale and fragile as the hope that clung to Thyra's heart. Outside, the village was waking under a shroud of cold mist, but the air inside the long hall was heavy with an oppressive silence that pressed upon every corner like a gathering storm. The fire that once symbolized life and renewal now seemed to smolder with a darker intent, its embers glowing faintly beneath the thick stone hearth. Thyra stood at the center of the hall, her wolfskin cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the familiar weight of the amulet of Freya cool against her chest. Her gaze was steady, though her breath trembled with the knowledge of what was to come. Around her, the faces of the Sköldungs stared with a mixture of suspicion, anger, and fear. Some were kin, relatives bound by blood and tradition, but all were prisoners of the same unyielding code. Halfdan sat on his raised throne, carved intricately from ancient oak and adorned with symbols of power and war. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, now flickered with a restless uncertainty. The scar along his face seemed sharper in the dim light, a jagged reminder of battles fought both without and within. The warriors who had once stood behind him like an unbreakable wall now shifted uneasily. Among them, Ragnvald's pale eyes glinted with cold defiance, his presence a shadow that stretched across the hall. His lips curled in a smirk that spoke of challenge, of impending judgment. The murmurs that had rippled through the village like wildfire had culminated in this moment. The question hanging in the air was clear. Would Thyra's rebellion be crushed beneath the weight of ancient laws, or would the fragile hope she had kindled survive the coming storm? Halfdan's voice cut through the tension, deep and resonant. "Sister, you have placed us all at risk. The gods demand blood. Tradition binds us to honor their will. Your mercy threatens the strength of our clan." Thyra lifted her chin, the runic tattoos along her forearms catching the flickering light. "The gods also demand wisdom.
If our strength is measured only in death, we lose the very soul that makes us whole. Mercy is not weakness, it is courage." A murmur of dissent rose from the crowd, but Thyra pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I do not deny our customs, nor the sacrifices of our ancestors. But I have seen a different path, a way to protect our people without endless cycles of violence." Ragnvald stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. "And what of Kára, the Saxon woman you shield? You have betrayed your blood to save an enemy. That is treason." Thyra's green eyes burned with fierce resolve. "Kára is more than a prisoner. She is a healer, a bearer of knowledge that can mend bodies and hearts alike. To slay her would be to slay the future." The hall erupted in a cacophony of voices, some shouting accusations, others pleading for reason. Halfdan raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. "Enough," he declared. "We shall hold a trial. The gods will judge, and so shall the Sköldung. Thyra, you will speak your truth before all, and your fate will be decided." The doors to the long hall swung open, and the village gathered, men, women, and elders from every corner, their faces marked by suspicion and hope. Halfdan raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade.
"Enough," he declared. "We shall hold a trial. The gods will judge, and so shall the Skildung. Thyra, you will speak your truth before all, and your fate will be decided." The doors to the long hall swung open, and the village gathered, men, women, and elders from every corner, their faces marked by suspicion and hope. The weight of generations bore down upon Thyra as she took her place before them, her heart pounding like a war drum. Kára stood beside her, cloaked now not as a prisoner, but as an equal, the simple woolen tunic a symbol of the fragile alliance they had forged. Her blue eyes met Thyra's with unwavering trust, a bond stronger than any oath sworn in blood. The Jarl's voice rang out again, calling for witnesses and testimonies. One by one voices rose, some condemning, others defending. Ulf Thorson spoke of Thyra's wisdom and the new strength she had brought to the clan. Elders recalled the old ways, the cost of defiance. Ragnvald's accusations echoed like thunder, a relentless storm seeking to drown the fragile light of mercy. Thyra listened, her mind a tempest of doubt and determination. When her turn came, she spoke not just with words, but with the depth of her conviction. "I stand not as a rebel, but as a servant of both gods and people. The world beyond our borders shifts, and we must shift with it, or be left behind, broken and forgotten. I ask not for blind faith in me, but for faith in the possibility of change." Her voice faltered, then steadied, carrying the weight of years spent wrestling with doubt and hope. "I do not ask you to abandon your honor or your ancestors. I ask only for the courage to see beyond the smoke of old fires, to embrace a future where compassion and strength walk hand in hand." The silence that followed was profound. The crowd held its breath, waiting for Halfdan's judgment. The Jarl's eyes searched Thyra's face, then shifted to Kára. For a moment, the hardness in his gaze softened, revealing a flicker of something unspoken. Perhaps understanding, perhaps fear.
"The gods have spoken through fire and word," Halfdan finally said, his voice heavy with the burden of leadership. "We will honor Thyra's vision, for now. The sacrifices will cease. The prisoners will live and serve. But know this, any who betray our people shall answer not only to me, but to the gods themselves." A murmur of relief rippled through the crowd, but beneath it lurked the shadow of dissent. Ragnvald's glare was a promise of battle yet to come. That night, as the village settled into uneasy peace, Thyra and Kára stood beneath the vast northern sky, stars glittering like distant fires. Their hands found each other's, fingers entwined in silent affirmation. The fire ritual had not only preserved lives, it had ignited a revolution of the heart, one that would echo through the ages. And though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, within their shared silence burned a light fierce enough to guide them through the darkest winters to come. The dawn's pale light crept hesitantly over the village, casting long, fragile shadows across the worn wooden planks of the long hall. Inside, the heavy atmosphere of the previous night's trial still lingered like a thick fog, clinging to the walls and twisting in the breath of the gathered Skildung. The murmurs of the crowd had softened, but the undercurrent of tension remained, like the last embers of a fire reluctant to die. In the center of the hall, Thyra stood resolute, her hands still trembling slightly from the weight of what she had just endured. Her eyes, green and steady as the forest depths, had witnessed both the suffering and hope of her people, and the fragile bond forged with Kára.
Around them, the clan's elders whispered among themselves, their faces etched with lines deepened by years of tradition and hardship. Some bore expressions of grudging respect. Others harbored the cold suspicion of those unwilling to fully accept change. Halfdan's presence anchored the hall, his gaze moving between Thyra, Kára, and the assembly, holding the fragile threads of leadership with a grip tempered by conflict. His usual harshness had softened, replaced by a weariness that spoke of a man burdened by the impossible choices of kingship. Kára stood quietly beside Thyra, no longer a prisoner, but a symbol of defiance and hope. Her blue eyes, once wary and guarded, now carried the quiet strength of someone who had weathered storms both within and without. Her hands, once tightly clenched in silent resistance, now relaxed, fingers brushing briefly against Thyra's, as if seeking reassurance. The small silver brooch, peeking from beneath her tunic, caught the flickering shafts of morning light, a subtle reminder of the nobility she still carried, even in exile. The village had witnessed the upheaval, and now the question remained, would this fragile peace hold, or would the old fires of hatred and fear be rekindled? Ulf Thorson, ever the calm presence amidst turmoil, stepped forward.
His voice was steady, though laced with the gravity of the moment. The clan has many wounds, both visible and hidden. Thyra's courage has challenged not only tradition, but the very soul of the Sköldung. It is not an easy path she walks. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, but Ragnvald's shadow loomed near, his pale eyes narrowed like a winter's chill. His voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and accusing. Courage or recklessness? We risk the wrath of the gods for the sake of one woman's folly. Who among us would follow a leader who betrays our blood? Halfdan's gaze darkened for a heartbeat, the weight of his brotherhood and rulership warring in his gaze. Then, with a voice heavy with reluctant authority, he stepped forward. Ragnvald speaks harshly, but not without reason. Our ancestors commanded sacrifice as the price of survival. Yet we stand at a crossroads, one that may define the future of our people. He turned to Thyra, then to Kára. You have both stood before us, bearing the weight of this choice. What say you now, your fate intertwined with the clan's? Thyra inhaled deeply, the breath steadying her tremors. I speak not only as a priestess, but as one who has seen the cost of endless bloodshed. Mercy does not make us weak, it makes us whole. The gods show their favor not only through fire and sacrifice, but through wisdom and compassion. Her voice, though soft, carried like a clarion call. The hall fell silent, the words hanging between the wooden beams like sacred promises. Kára stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. I am no longer a prisoner, but a sister to this people. My knowledge of healing can bind wounds that weapons leave behind. To shun me is to reject the chance for peace that has long eluded us. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Some hearts stirred with hope, others clenched against uncertainty. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift began, a crack in the wall of ancient fear. An elder, frail but steeped in the wisdom of many winters, rose slowly. His voice trembled with age, but held firm conviction. The gods have spoken through Thyra's vision. Perhaps it is time to listen with hearts unclouded by old grudges. The strength of a clan is not measured by blood spilled, but by the bonds it nurtures. The words sparked murmurs of assent. Slowly, others rose to affirm the sentiment, voices weaving together in a chorus that dared to dream beyond the old fires. Even some warriors, their faces hardened by years of battle, nodded in reluctant acceptance. Ragnvald's lips pressed into a thin line, his icy gaze scanning the crowd.
For a tense moment, it seemed as if he might challenge the tide. But the weight of the gathering, the unity forming before him, held him still. He turned sharply, his footsteps echoing in the hall as he departed with a silent promise of return. Halfdan's eyes lingered on the retreating figure, before settling back on Thyra and Kára.
"This peace is fragile," he said quietly, the edge of command softened by a brother's love and a jarl's burden. "But it is a beginning. We will watch, we will guard, and we will remember." Outside, the village seemed to exhale, the tension easing like a storm passing over a rugged coastline. The fires that once threatened to consume now glowed gently, symbols not of destruction but of renewal. The scent of burning pine and herbs mingled with the crisp air, carrying the promise of change. In the days that followed, the Shuldung moved cautiously toward healing. The prisoners were freed from the harshest chains, their hands set to work rebuilding what had been broken. Kára's knowledge spread quietly, her remedies soothing wounds and easing fevers. The whispers of discord faded as the tangible benefits of mercy took root. Even those once doubtful found themselves drawn to the newfound hope. Thyra's role shifted from priestess bound by ancient rites to a leader who bridged worlds, both seen and unseen, human and divine. Her bond with Kára deepened, no longer hidden in silence, but nurtured in shared purpose and quiet companionship. They walked together through the village, their presence a living testament to the possibility of peace born from conflict. One evening, as the sun dipped low beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Thyra and Kára stood at the edge of the forest. The distant howls of wolves echoed, a haunting symphony of wildness and survival. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, the first stars beginning to pierce the twilight. Kára's hand found Thyra's, fingers intertwining as naturally as the roots of the trees around them. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of gratitude and something deeper, trust, perhaps even love. Thyra's gaze softened, the runic tattoos on her arms catching the fading light. "And you saved me, from the darkness of doubt and the loneliness of tradition without heart." They stood together in silence, the fire within each mirrored by the fading light around them. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both known and hidden. But in that shared stillness lay a promise, a bond forged not only by survival, but by the courage to love in a world built on war. Back in the village, the Long Hall's doors opened to a new day. The Shuldung emerged from the shadows of their past, their eyes bright with the cautious hope of a dawn yet to come. The festival of the Fire Purifier would never be the same. It had transformed not just the fate of prisoners and captors, but the very soul of a people. And beneath the vast northern sky, two women, priestess and healer, Viking and Saxon, had written a new story. One not of blood and fire alone, but of mercy, redemption, and the enduring power of compassion to rewrite even the fiercest destinies. The flames of old rituals flickered out, but a new fire burned quietly, a fire that would warm the coldest of winters and light the way forward, long after the last ember faded into the night. The chill of early winter had settled deep into the earth, folding the Shuldung village beneath a thick blanket of frost and silence. Yet beneath the hush of snow-laden pines and frozen streams, a quiet transformation pulsed steadily, like the faint heartbeat of something new and fragile, yet undeniably alive. In the days following the festival's upheaval, life in the village had settled into a rhythm both familiar and strange. The great fire that once symbolized destruction and sacrifice now burned low in the hearths of homes, its flames offering warmth and comfort rather than dread. The air was sharper, crisper, carrying the scent of pine resin mingled with the faint sweetness of smoke from medicinal herbs drying in doorways. The people moved among longhouses and gathering places with cautious hope, their eyes brighter, their steps lighter, as if the weight of old fears had begun to lift. Thyra walked through the village with a calm purpose, her presence softened by the winter's pale light. The wolfskin cloak draped around her shoulders shifted gently with each step, the faint scent of wild thyme woven into her dark red braids trailing behind her like a silent song. Her eyes, green as the moss beneath ancient oaks, scanned the familiar faces of her people with a new tenderness, a tenderness born not only of duty, but of something deeper, a hope knitted into the very fabric of her heart. The villagers greeted her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The old wounds, both physical and spiritual, had begun to close, stitched together by small acts of kindness and shared labor. The prisoners, once bound by chains, now worked alongside their captors in the fields and workshops, their hands mending fences, tending animals, and repairing homes scarred by battle. The line between enemy and kin blurred beneath the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Among the most notable changes was Kára's place in the village. No longer a prisoner, she had become a healer, whose knowledge of herbs and remedies extended beyond the wild lore of the Sköldung. Her simple woolen tunic had been replaced by a finely woven cloak of deep charcoal, embroidered with subtle patterns of knotwork, a gift from Thyra, bestowed in a quiet ceremony witnessed by a handful of elders and friends. The silver brooch she once hid beneath her cloak now rested openly pinned at her throat, a symbol not only of her noble origins, but of the new chapter she carved here, far from the lands of Mercia. Kára moved among the people with quiet grace, her blue eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and determination. Children were drawn to her stories of distant forests and healing arts, while the elders sought her counsel on ailments that time and hardship had inflicted. The prisoners, once bound by chains, now worked alongside their captors in the fields and workshops, their hands mending fences, tending animals, and repairing homes scarred by battle. The line between enemy and kin blurred beneath the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Among the most notable changes was Kára's place in the village. No longer a prisoner, she had become a healer, whose knowledge of herbs and remedies extended beyond the wild lore of the Sköldung. Her simple woolen tunic had been replaced by a finely woven cloak of deep charcoal, embroidered with subtle patterns of knotwork, a gift from Thyra, bestowed in a quiet ceremony witnessed by a handful of elders and friends. The silver brooch she once hid beneath her cloak now rested openly pinned at her throat, a symbol not only of her noble origins, but of the new chapter she carved here, far from the lands of Mercia. Kára moved among the people with quiet grace, her blue eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and determination. Children were drawn to her stories of distant forests and healing arts, while the elders sought her counsel on ailments that time and hardship had inflicted.
Yet, despite her acceptance, she remained watchful, aware that beneath the surface, old resentments still flickered like dying embers, waiting for a restless wind. One afternoon, as the sun hung low over the frost-glazed fields, Thyra found Kára seated by the edge of the sacred grove, where the great oaks whispered secrets to the sky. The healer was weaving a garland of heather and wild thyme, her fingers deft and steady despite the cold. The soft rustle of dried leaves and the distant murmur of the village framed the moment as a fragile peace settled between them. Thyra approached quietly, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots. Her breath made small clouds in the crisp air, mingling with the scent of pine and earth. She knelt beside Kára, reaching out to touch a stray strand of hair that had escaped the healer's braid. "Have you found peace here?" Thyra asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of winter's hush. Kára's eyes lifted, meeting hers with a quiet strength.
"Peace is a path, not a place," she replied. "This village, your people, they have given me a chance to walk it. To heal not just wounds of body, but wounds of history and heart." Thyra smiled, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of Kára's birthmark, a small crescent moon at the base of her neck, a silent reminder of the night skies under which they had first found each other. "Together we have begun something new," Thyra said, her voice steady, "something that will outlast even the longest winters." Beyond the grove, the village stirred with life. Men and women gathered wood for the coming solstice fires. Children practiced songs passed down from ancestors, and elders exchanged stories that blended old wisdom with fresh hope. The festival of the Fire Purifier had changed, its flames no longer a harbinger of death, but a beacon of transformation. Thyra's thoughts drifted to her brother, Halfdan. Though burdened by the weight of leadership and the scars of war, he had embraced the fragile peace with a cautious heart. His presence remained a pillar for the clan, a reminder that even the hardest steel could bend without breaking. Yet, even as the village healed, not all journeys would end here. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in hues of pale gold, a figure prepared to leave the village, stepping into the unknown with a resolve that echoed a promise whispered beneath ancient trees. It was Ulf Thorson, the warrior whose steady calm had been a silent anchor through the storms of change. His rugged frame was cloaked in worn leather and thick wool, his sword sheathed but always near. He had served the clan faithfully for many winters, and though his loyalty to Halfdan and Thyra remained unwavering, a new calling beckoned him beyond the forests and mountains he knew so well. Thyra met him at the village edge, their breath mingling in the cold morning air. She placed a hand on his weathered shoulder, her eyes steady and full of unspoken gratitude.
"Where do you go?" she asked, her voice a whisper against the stillness. "To carry word of our peace?" Ulf replied, his gaze distant but sure. "To remind neighboring clans that mercy can strength, that change can grow from the smallest spark." Thyra nodded, a silent blessing passing between them. "May the gods guide your path. And may this village continue to burn with the fire of hope," Ulf said, turning toward the trail that wound through the frost-kissed woods. As he disappeared among the trees, Thyra felt a swell of both pride and sorrow, a recognition that the bonds forged here would ripple far beyond the borders of the Skjoldung. Back in the village, the longhouse hearths glowed warmly against the gathering night. Within their walls, families gathered close, sharing stories, songs, and laughter that echoed through the frost-quiet streets. The old songs were still sung, but new verses had been woven into their refrain, a song of mercy, courage, and the strength found in unity. One evening, beneath the northern lights that shimmered like ethereal ribbons across the sky, Thyra and Kára stood together on a hill overlooking the village. The cold wind tossed their hair and cloaks, carrying the scent of snow and pine. Their hands entwined, fingers laced with the quiet certainty of shared dreams and battles won. "The world beyond these hills is vast," Thyra said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "But here we have planted a seed." Kára nodded, her blue eyes reflecting the dancing lights above. "A seed that will grow, even in the coldest soil." They stayed there long after the village below had fallen silent, bound by a promise neither fire nor frost could extinguish. The festival of the Fire Purifier had passed, but its true gift, renewal, was only just beginning. In the years to come, the Skjoldung would remember this turning point, not as a fracture in their history, but as the dawn of a new age. The rituals would evolve, embracing mercy alongside tradition, forging a legacy that honored both the gods and the humanity that thrived beneath their watchful gaze. And beneath the endless northern sky, the story of two women, priestess and healer, Viking and Saxon, bound by fate and fire, would be whispered for generations. A testament to the power of love and courage to reshape destinies, to heal wounds unseen, and to light a path through even the darkest winters. The fire had changed, and through its steady glow, so had the world. The cold night air carried with it a stillness that seemed to settle deep into the bones of the village. Under the vast expanse of the northern sky, stars gleamed like shards of ice, silent witnesses to the lives below. Lives forever altered by the fire that had burned not only wood and flesh, but the old ways themselves. Thyra and Kára stood side by side, their breaths mingling in the frosty air, fingers entwined as they looked down upon the village that hummed with a quiet hope.
The weight of what had been endured, the sacrifices, the defiance, the whispered prayers, lay heavy, yet not oppressive. It was a burden transformed, shaped by courage, and the fragile flame of understanding kindled between two women whose worlds had once been torn by war and mistrust. Thyra's eyes traced the soft outline of Kára's face, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. The healer's steady gaze met hers, reflecting a strength born not of dominance, but of survival and quiet rebellion. No words were necessary. Between them, silence held the language of unspoken promises, of battles fought both within and without. Theirs was a bond forged in fire and shadow, one that defied the rigid hierarchies of their clans, the harsh decrees of tradition, and the cold expectations of a world ruled by blood and iron. The years to come would not be easy. The scars left by conflict and suspicion would linger, like faded runes carved into ancient stone, reminding the Skildung of the cost of change. Some would remember Thyra's mercy as weakness, others as the first glimmers of a new dawn. But beneath the surface, a seed had been planted, one that would grow in the soil of shared pain and hope. Thyra's thoughts drifted to the faces of her people, the warriors who had once called for blood, now tending fields alongside those they once called enemies. The children who would someday learn not just the old songs of war, but new tales of compassion and courage. The elders whose voices, though wary, now carried a note of quiet acceptance. And Halfdan, whose leadership bore the heavy weight of balancing honor and survival. She looked up at the shifting aurora borealis, ribbons of green and violet dancing across the sky like celestial fires. It was as if the gods themselves responded to the change, their ancient power bending to the will of those brave enough to listen. Kára's hand tightened around hers, a grounding touch. "Do you think they will ever truly understand?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with the tremors of doubt. Thyra's gaze lingered on the flickering lights of the village below. Understanding is a journey, not a gift. It begins with small steps, whispers that grow into voices, voices that become echoes carried across generations. She inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs with the scent of pine and earth, the promise of new life beneath the frost. We have lit a fire that no storm can fully extinguish. It will burn quietly at first, but it will grow, slowly, surely, until it warms even the coldest hearts. A shadow moved across the horizon, distant and unseen, a reminder that peace was never a final destination, but a fragile path to be walked anew each day. Kára tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then we must walk it together."
Thyra nodded, her heart steady, fortified by the strength she found in this fragile alliance.
The road ahead was uncertain, lined with dangers both old and new. But for the first time in many winters, the path was illuminated by more than just the light of fire. It was lit by hope. As the wind whispered through the branches overhead, carrying the murmurs of the forest and the distant howl of wolves, a quiet truth settled over them. Even in a world forged by steel and blood, there was room for mercy, for love, and for the courage to change. The fire that had sealed their fates had also freed them. In its dying embers lay the promise of rebirth. And in the silence between heartbeats, beneath the eternal northern stars, two women, priestess and healer, Viking and Saxon, held fast to a truth older than war itself, that compassion could be the strongest weapon of all. If this story stirred something deep within, if it kindled even a flicker of hope or courage, then the flame of these ancient tales will burn ever brighter. Join us in the next chapter, where the echoes of their choices ripple outward, shaping futures yet unseen. For in the end, beneath fire and ice, the greatest strength is found in the quiet acts of understanding. Let us walk that path together. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.